That winter night, the campus was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Snow muffled every sound, the laughter from the dorms, the hum of passing cars, until the world felt like it was holding its breath. I was heading back from my library shift, hugging my threadbare coat tighter. My breath fogged the air, and my fingers stung through the torn gloves I'd borrowed from a friend. The vending machines glowed faintly in the distance, their buzzing lights the only warmth in sight. That's when I saw him, a man, half collapsed behind the library dumpster, one arm trembling as if even gravity had given up on him. His hair was matted with snow, his suit soaked and torn. There was something expensive about the fabric, something out of place in this forgotten corner of campus. For a second, I froze. Maybe it was fear, or the exhaustion that comes from surviving too long on cheap instant noodles and unpaid bills. But then I heard a low sound, rough and broken. Don't let them find me. I blinked, certain I'd imagined it. But then he turned his head slightly, eyes fluttering open. And that look, he didn't look like a drunk or a thief. He looked hunted. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to walk away. It wasn't my problem. I had exams, rent, tuition due. I couldn't afford trouble. But his fingers twitched weakly in the snow, and suddenly, I saw my mother's face instead, the way she used to look at me when I was small and sick, when she had nothing but still stayed by my side. I crouched down beside him. "Hey," I whispered, "you'll freeze out here." His lips barely moved. "Go away." I ignored him and pressed two fingers against his neck, faint but alive. I looked around. The campus was empty, the security post deserted. My tiny dorm was barely big enough for me, but it was something. "Can you stand?" I asked. He didn't answer. So I dragged his arm over my shoulder and tried to lift him. He was heavier than he looked, all dead weight and silence. My knees scraped against the icy pavement, but I didn't stop. Step by step, breath by breath, we moved through the snow like two ghosts lost in the cold. By the time I got him to my dorm's back door, my body was shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the lock. The old wood creaked as we slipped inside, the heater barely working, air heavy with dust. I half dragged, half guided him up to the attic above my room, a storage space no one ever checked. I wrapped him in my only blanket and rubbed his hands until warmth returned to his fingers. His clothes were still damp, his face pale. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't a doctor, just a broke literature student trying not to drown in student loans. "Who are you?" I asked softly. His eyes opened for a brief second, dark, distant, but focused on me. Then he said the strangest thing. "I'll repay you one day." I almost laughed. Repay? I didn't even know what that meant. I just shook my head. "You don't owe me anything. Just rest." He closed his eyes again, breathing shallowly but steady now. I sat there for a long time, watching the frost melt from his hair, listening to the distant hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the old clock on my desk. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel lonely. I woke up the next morning to pale sunlight bleeding through the curtains. The attic was still, quiet, too quiet. The blanket was neatly folded. The spot where he'd lain was cold. My stomach dropped. "Hello?" I called softly, but there was no answer. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up, but the space was empty. Only a note lay where he'd been, folded once, clean and deliberate. I hesitated before opening it. "When I return, remember me." That was it. No name, no number. Just that one line, written in steady, almost elegant handwriting. For a moment, I stood there staring at it, heart pounding, unsure whether to be afraid or something else. It felt unreal, like a story you tell yourself to escape the monotony of your own life. I tucked the note into my notebook, next to my overdue tuition bill. Then I sighed and went to class. Because what else could I do? People like me didn't get swept into mysteries. We just kept surviving. But that night, when the snow started falling again, I found myself staring out the dorm window longer than usual. The campus lights blurred through the snowfall, soft and golden. Somewhere beyond them, I wondered if he was still out there. The stranger with haunted eyes, The one who'd said he'd repay me. Maybe he was lying. Maybe he was dangerous. Maybe I'd never see him again. But deep down, I knew one thing. There had been something in his voice. A promise. A shadow of truth that clung to the air even after he was gone. And as the snow fell heavier, burying the footprints we'd left behind, I pressed my fingers against the cold glass and whispered the only thing I could think of: stay alive. When morning came, the world was white again, clean and quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. But the note remained tucked in my notebook, a secret the world could never understand. I didn't know it then, but that night had already changed everything. The boy I saved in the snow would return, not as the stranger I'd pitied, but as the man who would rewrite the skyline. And my fate with it. 3 days later, his face was everywhere. The university cafeteria buzzed with the same tone students used when someone else's tragedy became entertainment. Newspapers, social media, even the dorm group chat all carried the same headline: fugitive heir missing after corporate collapse. I froze mid-bite, the cheap rice on my spoon turning to dust in my mouth. The photo under the headline, the sharp eyes, the faint scar above his brow, the expensive coat was unmistakable. It was him. The man I'd dragged out of the snow. The stranger who'd whispered, "Don't let them find me." I couldn't breathe. The table beside me erupted in laughter. "Did you hear? They say he embezzled billions from his father's company." Another voice joined in. "He vanished after the board found out. Probably hiding abroad by now." I pushed my tray away before my shaking hands could give me away. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I wanted to stand up and shout, "He's not what you think." But what proof did I have? To them, he was a name on a scandal. To me, he was just a pair of trembling hands clutching a blanket in my attic. The next morning, 2 men in suits came to campus. University security escorted them straight into our department office. Routine questioning, my professor said. But his tone said something else: fear. I sat frozen at my desk as they went from student to student. My classmates whispered, curious, eager for drama. When they called my name, every eye turned toward me. The taller man adjusted his tie. "Miss Lin Ai, is it?" "Yes." My voice cracked. He studied me for a moment. "You live near the East Dormitory?" "Yes, sir." "Did you notice anyone suspicious near the library 2 nights ago?" I swallowed hard. "No, sir." He exchanged a look with his partner. "You're sure?" "Yes." They asked a few more questions: what time I left, whether I'd seen anyone matching the suspect's description, and finally, they moved on. I didn't exhale until the door closed behind them. Across the room, my friend Lily nudged me. "Why are you shaking?" My throat closed. "It's just cold." She frowned. "You're always cold lately." That night, I opened my notebook again. The note was still there, folded neatly like a wound that refused to close. "When I return, remember me." I traced the letters with my finger. Why would someone like him, a man born into wealth and power, end up sleeping behind a library dumpster? Why would he trust me, of all people, to keep him safe? My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at that single line, until the room went dark around me. The following days were harder. Rumors spread that the fugitive had passed through our campus. Professors warned us to stay away from anything suspicious. And then, suddenly, people started avoiding me. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. My classmates whispered about coincidences, how I'd missed the group dinner, how I'd been seen near the library that night. It didn't take long before someone slipped a note into my locker. "If you're hiding him, you'll go down too." I crushed it in my fist. That night, I called my mother. She coughed softly on the other end, her voice thin but gentle. "Are you eating properly?" "Yes, Mama." "You sound tired." "I'm fine." I wasn't. But how could I tell her that the kindness she'd taught me, the one rule she'd repeated all my life, help others when you can, was now eating me alive? When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The city lights glowed beyond the dorm window, each one a reminder of the distance between who I was and who I had to pretend to be. The winter deepened. The snow turned gray, slushed with mud. And one evening, As I left the library after my shift, I noticed something strange, a car sleek black. The kind of car that didn't belong near student dorms was parked under the flickering streetlight, the window rolled down slightly. A man in a driver's uniform looked at me. "Miss Lin Ai?" My pulse spiked. "Yes?" He didn't answer, just hesitated for a moment, as if reconsidering, then said quietly, "Sorry, wrong person." He drove off, tires crunching over snow. But before the car disappeared, I caught a glimpse of someone in the back seat, a shadow, a familiar outline. My breath hitched. No, it couldn't be. I ran a few steps after it, slipping on the icy path. But the taillights vanished into the fog. The cold bit through my coat, but I barely felt it. My heartbeat was too loud. My mind to full. It was him. I knew it. I'd seen that posture before, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was carrying a burden too heavy to name. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image replayed over and over. The window, the eyes. I swore I recognized. The way the car hesitated before leaving. If he was alive, why hadn't he said anything? Why watch from a distance? Part of me felt relief. Another part felt abandoned. I wanted to believe his promise. "When I return, remember me." But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd remembered someone who never planned to return at all. Days passed. The world moved on. The news cycle replaced his story with another scandal. The gossip died down. And yet, every time snow fell, my chest tightened. I started keeping his note in my coat pocket, like a secret heartbeat. One evening, as I left class, I passed the same alley where I'd found him months ago. The snow had melted now, puddles reflecting the streetlights. I stopped for a moment, staring at the dark space behind the dumpster. It felt like standing on the edge of a dream I couldn't wake from. I whispered into the cold, half mocking, half desperate, "Where are you?" Only the wind answered, brushing against my hair like a ghost. I closed my eyes. "Stay alive," I murmured again, and somewhere deep inside, a voice I couldn't hear yet whispered back, "I will. And when I do, I'll come back for you." My life had always been about survival, not dreams. Before the snow, before the stranger, before the whispers and fear, I was just another face in the crowd, learning how to disappear quietly. I grew up in a one-room apartment above a grocery shop in a town that didn't even have a name worth remembering. My mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day and sewing at night. The hum of her sewing machine was the sound of my childhood. It replaced lullabies. Every morning before dawn, she'd braid my hair and whisper the same words: "Study hard, AI. Knowledge is something no one can steal." She never said love. She didn't have to. It lived in the way she tightened my scarf when the winters came, or how she saved the biggest piece of tofu for me, even when her stomach growled. When I turned 16, the shop downstairs went bankrupt, and we were forced to move again. That year, the rent rose faster than my mother's wages, and I started working at the nearby diner, grease-stained aprons, customers who complained about prices, nights where I came home smelling of oil and coffee, hands too sore to even hold a pen. But somehow, through every late shift and every unpaid bill, I clung to her words, "Study hard." It became my prayer. By the time I got accepted into the university in the city, it felt like a miracle, one I couldn't afford but couldn't let go of either. My mother sold her gold ring to pay my first semester's fees. When I asked her what she'd wear in its place, she smiled and said, "Hope." Life in the city was harsher than I expected. Everyone there seemed to move with purpose, branded clothes, sleek phones, voices that never trembled. I rented a small room that could barely fit a bed, worked nights in the library, and skipped lunch more often than I admitted. While others went out drinking after exams, I counted coins for bus fare. While they wore perfume, I wore detergent on my hands. But it wasn't the hardship that hurt most. It was the silence. No one looked at you unless you were useful. No one asked if you were okay unless it benefited them. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk past him that night. When I saw that man behind the dumpster, half buried in snow, I didn't see a stranger. I saw myself, alone, unseen, waiting for someone to care. Sometimes I think kindness is the only rebellion left. The world teaches you to protect yourself, to lock your heart away before it gets broken, to look out only for your own survival. But every once in a while, something inside refuses. I remember the night after I helped him, how the heater barely worked, how I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, wondering if I'd done something foolish. Maybe I had, but it didn't feel wrong. Helping him made me feel human again, and maybe that scared me most of all. The winter months passed. Classes grew harder. My savings shrank faster than snow under the sun. I got used to the ache in my stomach and the dark circles under my eyes. When you're poor, exhaustion becomes your shadow. You stop dreaming of rest, you just learn to move through the pain. Still, sometimes, I'd find myself staring at the folded note hidden between my textbooks. When I return, remember me. Remember him? How could I forget? There was something about the way he'd said it, quiet but steady, like a vow whispered to the night. It didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like promise. But I wasn't foolish enough to hope. I'd learned early that people leave, and those who promise to come back rarely do. One afternoon, I walked past a jewelry store on my way to work. Behind the glass, a couple was laughing, the girl's hand glowing with a diamond ring. I caught my reflection beside her, same age, different worlds. For a moment, bitterness pricked at me. I hated that it did. Then I thought of my mother's hands, calloused and cracked from sewing. She used to say, "We can't choose where we start, AI, but we can choose what kind of person we become." Maybe that's why I couldn't bring myself to regret helping him, even if it brought nothing back. Even if no one ever knew. Even if he forgot. That night, I sat by my window watching the snow fall again. The city lights shimmered through the flakes like tiny stars trying to reach me. I thought about my mother's ring, my debts, my endless exhaustion, and then, for no reason, I smiled, because somewhere out there, maybe that stranger, the one who'd said he'd repay me, was still alive. Maybe he was trying to survive too, and if he wasn't, then I hoped at least that he'd felt warmth once. However, briefly, before the world froze again, a week later, I received a letter from my mother. Inside was a photo of me at 12, holding a paper umbrella we'd made together during the rainy season. On the back, she'd written, "When the world forgets to be kind, you remember." I sat there, tracing the faded ink with my thumb, the smell of rain and glue still clinging to memory. Maybe that's why I helped him. Not because I was brave, but because I refused to forget. And maybe kindness, real kindness, isn't about expecting gratitude or reward. It's about refusing to let the world turn you cruel. The next morning, I went to class as usual. My friends gossiped about new scandals, new dramas, new dreams. I smiled when expected and nodded at the right moments. But inside, I felt strangely still, because somewhere deep inside me, I knew the story wasn't over. The world might forget people like me. But I had seen the way his eyes softened when he said, "I'll repay you one day." He wasn't lying. I could feel it. And though I didn't know when or how, I knew the snow hadn't fallen that night for nothing. Maybe kindness is a kind of rebellion against the world's cruelty. And if that's true, then that night, in the cold and silence, I rebelled for both of us. 4 years later, I thought I had finally learned how to stop waiting. The past had become something I folded neatly in the back of my mind, like an old photograph, faded, fragile, better left untouched. Life had taught me that people don't come back, and promises dissolve faster than snow. But fate doesn't forget what we do when no one is watching. It was a Wednesday evening, the kind of night where the city lights blurred into streaks of gold through the drizzle. I was walking home from my shift at the bookstore, clutching a paper bag of discounted bread and instant noodles. I stopped at a red light, staring absently at a giant billboard across the street. The image shimmered against the wet glass of the bus shelter. Citicorp acquires Skyline Group, new CEO returns to lead the empire. And then I saw his face. The world tilted. He was older, sharper, but unmistakable. The same eyes, the same faint scar near his temple. His hair was slicked back, his jaw more defined, his expression calm but distant. I couldn't breathe. The man I'd found behind a dumpster in the snow, the man who'd whispered, "Don't let them find me," was now staring down at the city from a 50-foot screen. Wearing a tailored suit and the title of CEO, the light turned green. People brushed past me, muttering. Someone bumped my shoulder, but I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my throat, and for a moment I thought it might stop altogether. "No," I whispered. "It can't be. It had to be coincidence. It had to be someone else. Because how could a fugitive heir turn into the most powerful man in the city in just 4 years?" I tore my gaze away and kept walking, forcing myself to breathe. I told myself to forget, to focus on my next paycheck, on rent, on everything real. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the snow, the trembling hands, the note that said, "When I return, remember me." The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. It was plain cream-colored, with no address. No stamp, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No logo, no explanation, only a few words. "You once gave me a roof. Now let me return the favor." And at the bottom, a signature. Lin. My vision blurred. I had never known his name before, not until now. I read the letter again, my heart thundering. There was also a small black card inside, a formal invitation embossed in gold. Citicorp Annual Gala, private guest. Date, Friday. Venue, the Grand Aurelia Hotel. I stared at it for a long time, feeling as if the walls of my tiny apartment were shrinking around me. Why now? Why me? And what did he mean by return the favor? I tried to convince myself not to go. It was ridiculous. People like me didn't belong in marble hotels or black tie events. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. So is unfinished fate. Friday came too fast. I borrowed a simple black dress from my roommate, nothing fancy, but clean and modest. As I stood before the mirror, I barely recognized the girl staring back. The years had changed me. My eyes carried more stories now, my shoulders more weight. When the car arrived, its headlights swept through the narrow alley, casting long shadows. A chauffeur stepped out, polite but unreadable. "Miss Lin Ai?" "Yes, Mr. Lee is expecting you." The drive was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. My hands twisted in my lap the entire way, and when the car stopped in front of the Grand Aurelia, I almost didn't get out. The hotel rose like a palace made of glass and light. Men in suits and women in gowns moved through the entrance under golden chandeliers. My reflection in the glass doors looked absurdly small, out of place. But before I could retreat, the doorman nodded. "Right this way, miss." Inside, everything glittered. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors. The air smelled of champagne and power. Every step echoed louder than I wanted it to. And then Miss Lin Ai? I turned. He stood a few feet away, tall, composed, and so achingly familiar it felt unreal. No longer the broken stranger in the snow, but a man reborn, perfectly tailored suit, steady voice, the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without him asking. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He smiled faintly. "It's been a while." My throat tightened. You remember me?" His eyes softened. How could I forget? The sound of clinking glasses and low laughter faded around us. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. I didn't even tell you my name." "You don't have to thank me," I murmured. He shook his head. "I do. Everything I have now, this life, it started the night you refused to walk away." I didn't know what to say. Gratitude wasn't supposed to sound like a confession. He gestured toward the grand hall behind him. "Come, there's something I'd like to show you." The hall was full of powerful faces, politicians, investors, people who looked like they'd never known hunger or fear. I felt invisible among them, a shadow in borrowed fabric, but he never let me drift away. He introduced me as someone I owe my life to, and when I tried to protest, he silenced me with a look not stern, but full of something I couldn't name. Halfway through the evening, he raised a glass during his speech. "This city," he said, owes its foundation to a moment of mercy. Years ago, when I had nothing, a stranger chose kindness over fear. Tonight, she stands among us. Miss Lin Ai. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. My heart nearly stopped. He continued, his voice steady. If this empire has a heart, it's hers. Applause thundered. But I couldn't hear any of it. My world had tilted again, this time not from fear, but disbelief. When he stepped down from the stage, he came straight to me, lowering his voice. You once gave me a roof. Tonight, I give you the sky. And before I could speak, he pressed a folded document into my trembling hands. It was a property deed, my name written neatly at the top. I looked up at him, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't save you for this. I know. His voice was low, almost tender. That's why I owe you everything. The chandelier light caught in his eyes then, reflecting something fragile beneath the strength, and in that moment, I realized no amount of wealth could hide the loneliness that still lived behind his calm. He hadn't just returned to repay a debt. He'd come back to find something he'd lost long before the snow, something human. The next few days passed like I was living someone else's life. Everywhere I went, I could still hear the echo of that night, the applause, the murmured congratulations, the flash of cameras when Li Wei had said my name before the world. The girl who once scraped dishes in a dorm kitchen now had a penthouse deed sitting in her drawer. It didn't feel real. I went back to my job at the bookstore the next morning because I didn't know what else to do. The other clerks stared at me, whispering behind the counter. Some were curious, others cruel. Did you see the news? One girl muttered loudly enough for me to hear. She's the CEO's mystery girl, the one who saved him. Must be nice. Another smirked. You think she saved him or seduced him? Their laughter followed me into the stockroom. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, gripping the shelf until my knuckles turned white. The world has a way of twisting kindness into suspicion. It made me wonder if I'd done something wrong by simply caring once. That afternoon, a black car stopped in front of the store. Li Wei stepped out. For a moment, everything went still. People on the sidewalk paused, staring at the man in the tailored gray suit who carried the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. He ignored them all. His eyes found me immediately through the window. Miss Lin, he said as he entered, his voice low but warm. I thought we might talk. I froze, heart hammering. Here? He smiled faintly. Unless you prefer elsewhere. Half the store went silent. My manager's mouth dropped open. Of course, I stammered. He nodded toward the door, and I followed him outside, feeling every pair of eyes burning holes into my back. The car door opened. Please, he said softly. Just 10 minutes. 10 minutes turned into an hour. He took me to a quiet restaurant on the top floor of a hotel. No reporters, no music, just a panoramic view of the city skyline. I sat across from him, still clutching my hands in my lap. You shouldn't have come to my workplace, I said finally. I wanted to see where you've been, he said simply. The places that built you. I frowned. You don't owe me this much. He leaned back, studying me with a mixture of calm and curiosity. You keep saying that, because it's true. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but I don't believe in debts measured in money or property. Some things can only be repaid by building something new. I blinked. What do you mean? He reached into his jacket and slid a folder across the table. My company's launching a new division, Citicorp Foundation. I want you to join it. I stared at him. You want me to work for you? He nodded. You have the heart this city lacks. I've seen what greed looks like. You remind me what compassion can build. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I'm not qualified. I have no degree in business. I'm just a survivor. He interrupted gently. That's qualification enough. His words caught me off guard. You're offering me a job out of pity, I said. No, he said quietly. I'm offering you a chance to help others the way you helped me. There was no arrogance in his tone, only sincerity. Still, I hesitated. What if people think they already think? He said, his voice softening. Let them. He glanced toward the window, where the city lights glowed like constellations. I built all this chasing power, but power without purpose is just another cage. His gaze returned to mine. Help me build something better. I didn't answer that night, but when I got home, I opened his folder. Inside were project outlines for community housing, scholarships, and mental health centers. On the last page, a handwritten note. You once gave me a roof. Now let's give others the same. I sat there for a long time, staring at that line until my eyes blurred. By morning, I'd made my choice. Working under Li Wei was nothing like I expected. He treated everyone with respect, but his presence carried quiet gravity. Every room stilled when he entered. And yet, around me, something softened in him. He didn't hover or flaunt. He simply noticed. When I stayed late, he'd leave tea on my desk. When I looked tired, he'd tell me, the city can wait. You don't have to prove yourself to exhaustion. And somehow, between meetings and projects, a fragile rhythm formed, but not everyone approved. Whispers followed me through the office halls. She must be his mistress. No one rises that fast unless there's a reason. I heard he bought her an apartment. I pretended not to hear, until one day, I overheard something that stopped me cold. She's the one who hid him during the investigation years ago, someone said near the water cooler. She was part of it. That's why he protects her. My stomach nodded. That night, I left early, heart heavy. As I waited for the elevator, Li Wei appeared beside me, silent. You're leaving? Yes, I murmured. It's been a long day. He studied my face, then said quietly, it's not the work that's tiring you, is it? I didn't answer. The elevator doors opened. He didn't step in. Instead, he said softly, don't let their noise drown what you've built. You've earned your place here. I met his eyes. You don't know what they're saying. I know exactly what they're saying, he replied. And I don't care. The elevator doors closed between us, but his voice lingered. Weeks passed. The projects flourished. We worked side by side, long hours, quiet meals, conversations that drifted between logistics and life. I began to see the man beneath the power, the quiet observer, the insomniac who still stared too long at the rain, the human being behind the myth. One night, as we reviewed proposals, I found myself watching him longer than I meant to. He caught me. What? He asked, half smiling. You're different from before, I said. Before? When I found you, you looked lost. He looked out the window at the glittering skyline. Maybe I still am, but now, at least I know what I'm looking for. What's that? I asked softly. He turned to me. Something worth coming back to. The air shifted between us, unspoken, fragile, real. He smiled faintly then, almost as if saving the moment from breaking. Get some rest, Lin Ai. Tomorrow, the city needs your fire again. When I got home, I stood on my balcony, staring at the same skyline he'd built 4 years ago. I gave a stranger warmth for one night. Now, he gave me purpose. And though I didn't yet understand what it meant, something deep inside me whispered that fate was finally keeping its promise. That night, his words echoed in my mind. You remind me what compassion can build. I didn't know it yet, but he wasn't just rebuilding the city. He was rebuilding me. It started with a single headline: CEO's secret beneficiary charity director linked to billionaire Li Wei. By noon, my face was everywhere, cropped from press photos, magnified on gossip pages, dissected by strangers who'd never met me. Every word written about me felt like a blade dipped in sugar. Mystery woman, gold digger, hidden lover. At first, I thought it would pass. I told myself that rumors, like storms, always fade if you stay still long enough. But storms like this don't fade, they feed on silence. By the next morning, the foundation's inbox was flooded with hate mail. Donors withdrew. Volunteers whispered. Even the receptionist stopped meeting my eyes. I should have been used to humiliation by now. Poverty has its own brand of invisibility. You learn to absorb cruelty quietly. But this was different. This was public. I tried to call Li Wei. No answer. His office said he was in meetings. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the foundation building, the harsh fluorescent lights making me look like a stranger. My reflection didn't belong to the girl who once studied by candlelight. She looked like the kind of woman people despised without knowing why. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Insiders claim CEO rewards ex-lover with luxury property. They'd found the apartment deed, the one he'd given me as a gesture of gratitude. And now, gratitude had become evidence. When I stepped out, people avoided me. The hallway felt longer than usual, lined with polite silence that cut sharper than words. I made it to my office and closed the door, trying to breathe. The sound of typing, laughter, life, all of it went on outside untouched. Then, a knock. Li wasted there. He looked tired but composed. Dressed in his usual black suit, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked. I almost laughed. "You've seen the headlines, haven't you?" His jaw tightened. "I have." "Then you know they're calling me your mistress." "I know. And you're just standing there?" I snapped, surprising myself with how sharp it came out. "Say something, Li Wei." "Anything." His eyes met mine, calm, steady, infuriatingly gentle. "I am." "Then say it louder," I said. "Because the world is tearing me apart out there." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "If I shout, they'll only shout louder. Let me handle this my way." I shook my head, bitter laughter breaking through my tears. "Your way is silence." "Silence," he said quietly, "isn't the same as surrender." That evening, I left the office before anyone else. The city outside was humming, alive and cruel. As I walked through the crowd, I could feel the eyes on me, the quiet judgment of strangers who thought they knew my story. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in your lane." I stopped under a streetlight and stared at the message until the letters blurred. Then I deleted it. Because what else could I do? The wind was cold that night, carrying the smell of rain. I pulled my coat tighter and walked faster. When I reached my building, a group of reporters stood near the entrance. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted, "Miss Lin, how long have you been involved with Mr. Li? Is it true he bought you your position? Did you hide your relationship for years?" I froze, blinded by the flashes. Someone grabbed my sleeve. I pulled away, heart racing, and ran inside. The elevator doors closed just as one of them yelled, "Is he with you tonight?" Their words echoed long after the doors sealed. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were still trembling. I slid down against the door, breathing hard, tears threatening again. And then my phone rang. Lin Ai. His voice was calm, steady, the same voice that had once anchored me in a storm. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't call me now. You're safe?" "Do I look safe to you?" My voice cracked. "They're outside, shouting my name like it's a crime." "I know," he said softly. "That's why we need to fight this together." I laughed bitterly. "Together? You have power. I have shame." There was silence on the line. Then quietly, "Tomorrow morning, I'm the press conference." My breath caught. What are you going to do? What I should have done long ago. The next morning, the entire city watched. The conference hall was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, microphones pointed toward the stage like weapons. I stood hidden behind the curtain, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. Li Wei stepped onto the stage in his charcoal suit, his posture as composed as ever. Flashbulbs erupted. Questions flew. He raised a hand, and silence fell. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to correct a few things." The reporters leaned forward. "Years ago," he continued, "I lost everything. I was betrayed, hunted, left with nothing but a name I no longer wanted. On a freezing night, when the world turned its back on me, one person offered me shelter, a stranger who had nothing to give but kindness." The room stilled. Cameras clicked softly. "That woman," he said, looking directly into the crowd, "is Lin Ai." My knees weakened. "She saved my life," he went on. "There was no transaction, no debt, only mercy. The foundation, the apartment, everything. I've given her since it isn't a reward. It's a reminder of what humanity looks like when the world forgets it." Reporters whispered. Some scribbled frantically. Others stared in stunned silence. I built this city, Li Wei said, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. Because one woman believed I was worth saving when no one else did. He paused, then added quietly, if compassion is a scandal, then I accept the guilt. Applause. Slow at first, then building like thunder. I covered my mouth, tears spilling before I could stop them, for the first time in years. The truth didn't sound like a weapon, it sounded like grace. When the conference ended, he found me in the corridor. The cameras were gone. The air was quieter now, almost gentle. You didn't have to do that, I whispered. I did, he said simply. You gave me dignity when I had none. It's time I gave it back. My throat tightened. You just risked your reputation. He smiled faintly. Reputation is temporary, but some debts are eternal. He reached out, brushing his thumb gently against the corner of my eye, wiping away a tear I hadn't noticed. Don't hide from the world anymore, he said. You've earned your place in it. That night, as I walked home under the quiet drizzle, I thought about everything he'd said about mercy and guilt, and the strange symmetry of fate. The same rain that once hid him from the world now washed away the lies between us, and though the storm had nearly destroyed me, it also revealed something I hadn't seen before, that even the truth can sound like love, when spoken by someone brave enough to claim it. That night, I looked up at the skyline he'd built, shimmering through the mist, and whispered, You gave the world my name, but what am I supposed to do with the way my heart hears yours? The truth had freed me, but it cost him everything. In the weeks that followed his confession, the same cameras that once adored Li Wei now turned on him like vultures. Investors withdrew. Board members panicked. Every news outlet demanded to know why a man who once ruled the skyline would risk it all for a woman who had nothing to offer but a memory. The headlines changed overnight. Citicorp stocks plunge after CEO's emotional confession. Li Wei's empire crumbling. Was love his weakness? Love. They called it love. Now, as if the word itself were a scandal, I watched from the sidelines as the city he'd built began to turn against him. Meetings grew tense. Rumors spread of secret betrayals among his executives. And through it all, he stayed calm to calm. One night, as I left the foundation office, I saw his car still parked outside, lights dim. I hesitated before knocking on the tinted window. He rolled it down slowly. You shouldn't be here this late. Neither should you, I said. He smiled faintly, exhaustion shadowing his face. Habit. I could see the toll written all over him, the sleepless nights, the weight of decisions that never seemed to end. He looked older now, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Peace, maybe, or resignation. You're losing everything, I whispered. He leaned back, gaze distant. Everything but the reason I built it. Li Wei, he turned to me, his voice steady but low. If I have to choose between my company and my soul, I'll let the empire burn. By the next morning, the fire had already started. The board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but one of the directors had sent me the invite by mistake. When I entered the conference room, the air was thick with hostility. 12 men in dark suits sat around the long table, their voices sharp and practiced. Mr. Li, one of them began, your personal life has become a liability. Our shareholders demand your resignation. Li Wei stood at the head of the table, unflinching. Is that what this meeting is about? It's about damage control. Another snapped. Your sentimentality is destroying the company. We've lost 3 major investors in 48 hours. He folded his hands. If they can't stand for the truth, they were never partners worth keeping. Murmurs rippled across the room. One man slammed his pen against the table. You've lost perspective. This isn't about truth, it's about control. Li Wei's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Control is a poor substitute for integrity. The oldest board member sighed heavily. You used to understand the game. Wei, but you've let a woman. He stopped when Li Wei's eyes lifted sharply. Finish that sentence, Li Wei said quietly. Silence. No one dared. I stood near the door, hands clenched, heart pounding. I'd never seen power unravel so quietly. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply looked at them with that same composure that used to make them all follow him and now terrified them. Finally, he said, "You want my resignation? Fine, you'll have it by tomorrow." After the meeting, I followed him to his office. He didn't turn when I entered. He was standing by the window, staring out at the city below, the empire that once obeyed his every word. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. "I couldn't just stand there," I said. "You can't throw everything away." He turned then, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Everything?" He laughed under his breath. "Lin Ai. I threw away everything once before, my name, my safety, my freedom. And yet I lived. You think I can't do it again? But you worked so hard for this," I said, my voice trembling. "For years, I worked for power," he said. "And power isn't peace." He walked toward me, every step measured. "Do you remember what you said the night I left your attic?" I blinked, startled. "I didn't say anything. You said, 'Stay alive.'" His voice softened. "That's what I'm doing now. Staying alive." Tears burned my eyes. "And what about me? What happens to the foundation? To everything we built?" He smiled faintly. "You'll keep building it. You don't need my name to change the world." "Don't do this," I whispered. He reached out then, brushing his hand against mine, gentle but final. "Some debts are only repaid by letting go." That night, he resigned. The city woke to the shock of headlines. Lin Ai steps down, cites personal integrity over profit. Citicorp and Chaos founder leaves without warning. They called him a fool, a romantic, a man undone by his heart. But when I saw him walk out of that building for the last time, something inside me broke. Not because he'd fallen, but because he looked free. The cameras swarmed him. Reporters shouted questions. He didn't answer a single one. Instead, as he passed the foundation gate where I stood frozen, he paused and looked at me through the crowd. No words. Just a look, and somehow I understood. He was saying goodbye. The following weeks felt hollow. The foundation kept running, but his absence hung in every hallway like a shadow that refused to fade. The media eventually found new scandals to feed on, and the world moved on as it always does. But I could end single quotes T.A.T night. I'd find myself staring at the skyline again. The towers he'd built still glowed against the dark, like silent sentinels keeping their vigil. They said he'd disappeared, sold his shares, left the city entirely. No one knew where, until one morning, an envelope arrived on my desk. No return address, no signature, just my name, written in that same clean, steady hand. Inside was a single line: "I once had nothing." It was the only time I was truly free, and beneath it a photograph, a quiet mountain lake, surrounded by pines, the sky reflected perfectly on its still surface. I pressed the photo to my chest, tears sliding down silently. For the first time, I understood what he meant all those years ago when he promised to repay me. He hadn't meant wealth, or fame, or power. He meant peace. And maybe the only way he could give it to me was by finally finding it for himself. That night, I stood on the rooftop of the foundation, the city stretching beneath me like a sea of light. It was still his city, even if he no longer owned it. And somewhere out there, under a quieter sky, I hoped he was watching it too. As the wind swept through the night, I whispered into the glittering horizon, "You gave up the world to save your soul, Lin Ai. But how am I supposed to live in a world that still feels like it belongs to you?" Spring came quietly that year. The city thawed from winter's bitterness, but I felt colder than ever. Weeks had passed since Lin Ai disappeared, and the world had already rewritten his story without him, turning him into either a fallen idol or a ghost of his own empire. For me, he was neither. He was the man who once slept under my roof, who had promised to return, who had built a world from gratitude and walked away from it for peace. And yet, every day I looked at the skyline he left behind, I felt the same question echo inside me. Was this his freedom, or his punishment? The foundation kept me busy, projects doubled, donations recovered, and the city began to respect us again, ironically, because of the integrity he'd left behind. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Every success was a reminder of the man who had started it all. Then, one morning, as I reviewed grant applications, my assistant entered with an envelope. This came by courier. No sender. My heart skipped. I opened it slowly. Lin Ai, if you can forgive me, meet me where the snow first began to melt. There was no signature. Just a location, our old university town. I arrived 3 days later, standing at the gates of the campus that had once been my entire world. The air smelled of spring rain and cherry blossoms. Students hurried past, laughing, unburdened, and there, near the old library, I saw him. Li. He looked nothing like the man who once stood in marble halls or boardrooms. He wore a simple gray sweater, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair slightly longer, the shadows under his eyes replaced by quiet calm. For a moment, I couldn't move. He smiled first. You came. I shouldn't have, I whispered. I know. We stood under the same cherry tree where I used to sit after classes, sharing leftover bread with stray cats. The wind carried petals between us, soft as snow. You left everything, I said finally. The company, the city, your name. He nodded. Names can be rebuilt. Souls take longer. I stared at him, emotion tightening my throat. You said you'd repay me. Was this your idea of repayment vanishing? He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. No, this is me coming back as someone who finally deserves the life you saved. He led me through the campus, past the dorms to the small building that used to be abandoned, its windows cracked, its paint peeling. Now it was newly restored, the sign above the door freshly carved, the Lin Ai Scholarship Foundation. My breath caught. Inside, children from low-income families sat reading under soft yellow lights, their laughter filling the air. A teacher waved at him. Mr. Lee, they love the new library. He nodded with a quiet smile, then turned to me. I wanted to build something that lasts beyond names, he said. A place for students who remind me of you, the girl who gave without asking. I touched the engraved plaque on the wall. For the one who gave me shelter when I had none. Tears blurred my vision. You didn't have to do this. I know, he said softly. But I wanted to. We sat on a bench outside after the children left, the sound of rain starting again, gentle and rhythmic. I thought you'd hate me, he said suddenly. Why? For leaving. I looked at him, feeling the ache return. I did, for a while. And now, I exhaled slowly. I understand. He smiled faintly. You always did. For a while, we sat in silence, watching raindrops gather on the branches. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me something small, a key. What's this? A cottage near the river. It's quiet, peaceful. I thought maybe you could use a place to rest. I frowned. Li Wei, don't refuse, he said gently. It's not a gift. It's an apology. For what? For taking so long to learn what matters. The rain thickened, tapping softly on the umbrella he held over us. Do you regret it? I asked, walking away from all of it. He thought for a long moment. No, I regret waiting this long to live like this. He looked out over the wet grass, eyes distant but clear. You once told me that kindness was rebellion against cruelty. I think love is the same. It's the only rebellion that lasts. My heart ached with something between admiration and fear. What will you do now? Start again, he said simply. Not as a CEO, as a man who still owes a girl the peace he promised her. I looked down, my voice trembling. You don't owe me anything anymore. He smiled sadly. Then let me choose to stay. Days passed, and I found myself staying in that little town longer than planned. The world beyond it moved fast, but here, time softened. I visited the children's center every morning, baked bread with the volunteers, watched Li Wei rebuild bookshelves and laughter. It wasn't luxury. It was life, and for the first time in years, I felt safe enough to breathe. One evening, as the sunset spilled gold across the windows, I found him by the riverbank, skipping stones like a boy, relearning simplicity. Do you ever miss the city? I asked. He smiled without looking up. Sometimes, but it's strange. The city never really felt mine until I left it. He glanced at me. Now, it feels like it belongs to us both. My heart stilled. Li Wei, I whispered, what are we doing? He laughed softly. What does it look like? I don't know anymore. He turned to face me then, his expression gentle but unwavering. We're choosing. Choosing what? He stepped closer, eyes glinting with quiet resolve. Redemption, peace, each other. The air trembled between us, no music, no witnesses, just the sound of rain beginning to fall again. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. You once saved me from the cold. Now, I just want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel it again, for the first time. I didn't step back, because maybe this was what kindness was always meant to lead to, not debt, not power, but love that didn't demand or measure, love that simply stayed. That night, as I closed my eyes, I realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing what you'd build next together. When I woke before dawn, the river mist still clinging to the air, I saw his jacket draped over my shoulders and his quiet words etched into my heart. I wanted to give you the world, but you taught me to build a better one. Snow began to fall again, just like the night it all started. The city skyline glittered beneath the white haze, but this time, it wasn't cold, it was quiet, almost forgiving. I stood by the tall glass window of our small university town office, watching the flakes land softly against the pane. 4 years had passed since that winter when I found a stranger behind the library dumpster. 4 years since I gave him warmth, never realizing he'd return with a city in his hands and a heart finally free. Now, we had both returned to the beginning, but not as the same people. The Lin Ai Foundation had grown beyond either of us. We had schools in rural villages, food programs for poor students, and shelters for the homeless. It wasn't built on his empire, it was built on our redemption. Li Wei never took back his corporate seat. He didn't need to. He worked quietly as our chief advisor, smiling more often, speaking less. People no longer called him the Iron CEO. They called him Mr. Li, the man who listens, and somehow, that title suited him far more. That evening, we held a gala for the foundation's anniversary, nothing grand, just a hall filled with soft music, photographs of the lives we'd helped, and people who once thought hope had forgotten them. I walked in wearing a simple ivory dress borrowed, not bought. Reporters still tried to frame us as something dramatic, but I'd long stopped caring. Tonight wasn't about scandal or spectacle. It was about grace returning to where it began. As I greeted guests, I felt a familiar gaze from across the room. Li Wei stood near the stage, dressed in a dark suit with no tie, sleeves rolled up. The same man who once commanded boardrooms now stood beside a group of children, showing him drawings of their dreams. One of the girls tugged on his sleeve and pointed at me. He turned and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a man reclaiming power. It was the smile of a man who had finally found home. The event began with speeches from our staff and students. I was supposed to give the closing words, but my hands trembled as I stepped to the podium. 4 years ago, I began. I found a man behind a library dumpster. Laughter rippled softly through the crowd, but I continued, my voice steadying. I didn't know who he was. I only knew he was cold, lost, and human. I shared the little I had because, at that moment, it was all I could do. I paused, meeting Li Wei's gaze across the room. Tonight, I stand before you, not as someone who saved another, but as someone who was saved in return. This foundation was never about charity, it's about remembering that even the smallest act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. The audience rose in applause, but I barely heard it. All I saw was him, eyes glassy, proud and peaceful. After the ceremony ended, we stayed behind as the guests left. The hall emptied until only the echoes of laughter and fading music remained. He walked up to me slowly, holding a small velvet box. I was going to wait, he said quietly, but I don't think I need to anymore. I blinked, heart racing. Li Wei, he smiled faintly. Do you remember what you told me the night I left your attic? I frowned, thinking back. I told you to stay alive. He nodded. And you did more than that. You kept me alive even when I didn't want to be. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, no diamonds, just a single silver band carved with the image of a tiny roof. I don't have a city to give you anymore, he said, voice trembling slightly, but I have this. A promise, a home, a future we build from everything we once lost. Tears blurred my vision. He knelt, not out of tradition, but out of gratitude. Lin Ai, he said softly, will you marry me not as the girl who saved me, but as the woman who taught me how to live? The world went quiet around us. Only the snow outside answered. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. Yes, he smiled, sliding the ring onto my finger. Finally, he whispered, I'm home. The following morning, the newspapers carried a quiet headline, no drama, no scandal, just a photo of us standing beneath falling snow, hand in hand, from shelter to forever, the CEO who found his humanity. But we didn't read the articles. We spent the day at the new orphanage on the city's outskirts, painting walls, planting flowers, and sharing bread with children who called us Uncle Lee and Aunt Ai. Li Wei laughed when one of them smeared paint across his cheek. You see, he said, turning to me, they've already taken over my city. I smiled. Good, maybe they'll build it better. That night, he took me to the rooftop where we'd first met again months earlier, only this time. The city below wasn't chaos or power. It was peace. The buildings glowed like constellations, the streets alive with warmth. His city, my city, our city. We stood side by side in silence, the wind brushing through our hair. I once promised I'd repay you, he said softly, but now I realize you never wanted repayment. I turned to him, smiling through tears. I just wanted you to find peace. He nodded slowly. Then maybe the best way to repay you is to share it. He took my hand, our fingers fitting together like they had always known where to rest. Below us, the city lights shimmered like the reflection of every act of kindness we'd ever given, proof that mercy, once planted, always finds its way back. The clock struck midnight, and snow began to fall again, soft, endless, familiar. He looked up, eyes glinting under the glow. Do you think the world ever really changes? Maybe not all at once, I said, squeezing his hand, but one act at a time. He smiled. Then you changed mine. As the city glistened beneath us, I whispered the words that had started it all. You once said you'd return, owning the whole city. But Li Wei, you brought me something rare, a world where love finally feels like home. Sometimes I still wake to the sound of snow falling. It's not a sound, really more like a hush, a pause in the world that feels like memory breathing. When it happens, I always open the window and let the cold drift in, because every snowfall reminds me of him and of the night a stranger's life collided with mine under that same frozen sky. I used to think kindness was weakness. When you're poor, people teach you to survive, not to give. But I learned something else from that winter, that compassion isn't what drains you. It's what keeps you human. Years have passed since then. The city that once glittered far above me now feels closer, warmer. Not because I climbed higher, but because Li Wei taught me how to build bridges instead of walls. He still laughs when I call him the man who once owned everything. He says he only owns what he can carry in his heart now, and I believe him. We live quietly in the little cottage near the river, the one he gifted me after walking away from his empire. Mornings smell of tea and rain, and evenings hum with children's laughter from the village nearby. The world outside still rushes on, still hungers for power and wealth. But here, time feels slower, like the universe finally exhaled. Sometimes, the university invites us back to speak to the students. They always ask the same question. How did you know helping him would change your life? And every time, I smile and tell them the truth. I didn't, because that's the nature of mercy. You give it blindly, never knowing what it will grow into. You simply do it because the world already has enough cruelty. And maybe, just maybe, your small act becomes the moment someone remembers how to be good again. The Lin Ai Foundation now supports hundreds of students across the country. But my favorite project is still the first one, the scholarship program for kids who come from nothing but dreams. Every time I visit, I see faces full of hope and wonder if Li Wei sees himself in them too. He always says he does. Once, as we walked past a group of graduates, he whispered, "This is the real city I wanted to build." I looked up at him, smiling. "Then you've already built it." He shook his head gently. "No, he did. Sometimes, late at night, he still works by the window. Old habits don't die easily. I'll find him reading, papers scattered, eyes focused but softer now. And when I ask what he's doing, he'll say, 'I'm just thinking of ways to thank you again.' I always laugh. 'For what?' He looks at me like I should already know. 'For finding me before the world did.' And maybe that's the closest thing to love I've ever understood. Not grand gestures, not perfect words, but two souls who met in the worst moment of their lives and chose not to give up. There's a saying Li Wei likes: kindness doesn't vanish, it just waits for its season to bloom. I believe that now. Because once, I was a broke student with frozen fingers and borrowed courage. I had nothing to offer except a blanket, a roof, and a heart stubborn enough to care. And yet, that was enough to change the course of both our lives. The world thinks power builds cities, but I've seen something stronger. Kindness builds empires that no storm can wash away. Tonight, as I write these words, the city lights shimmer faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there, students are studying under the lamps we funded. Families are eating from the kitchens we built. And the world keeps turning, but I don't need to see it all to know it's real. Because once, under falling snow, a stranger looked at me and promised to return. And he did, owning not the city, but my heart. If you've ever given something small a coat, a smile, a moment of grace when you had nothing left to spare, believe this, you've already changed someone's world. You just may not see it yet. Sometimes fate takes years to circle back. Sometimes love is just gratitude that never stopped growing. That was my truth. If my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share your own story below. Because maybe the kindness you gave long ago is already on its way home.